And there's the nice young man standing here, one of our co-moderators, and Todd, yes, I'm sorry, hold for applause. And Todd Alba from the Todd Alba Show. Hold for standing. Thank you all for coming in. I know more folks are going to wander in as we go along here. We are about to start the radio portion of it. The first panel will really get going. Oh, Rudolph, please, no. The first panel will get going about 5:20 or so. So we're basically just doing a little pregame killing time for the radio network. So feel free to have little light conversations. But if you're guffawing really loud, it's only because Todd's been really funny about something. And then as we get closer to 5:20, you'll see our first panel come in, take their seats, and then we'll get going with the 3 25-minute discussions, a little bit more of this witty banter in between, and then we'll wrap things up at 6:45 so that we have time to set up for the debate watch party, which will be right outside the theater here. So our great thanks to everybody at the Overture, and especially to the folks at Courier Newsroom, the parent company of Up North News, for helping to organize our first ever live event. Thank you so much for coming down for this and tuning in. A lot of people are going to be tuning in by live stream and through the radio network as well. So we hope that you find it worth your time. We know that, and you're going to hear this a couple of times, the people in this room care about this stuff. You care about these issues. You're not our typical target audience, to be honest. We're usually talking to people who we try to make the political news approachable. These are, you all have friends and neighbors like this, or like, oh no, I don't want to talk about politics. No. But you need to. And you all have friends and neighbors that have said to you before elections, maybe from the election parking lot, going, who am I voting for in this race? So we hope we inform you a bit on some of the issues that you can then persuade some of your own friends to show up and vote for an April 1st election where they might not normally vote. So thank you again for doing that. We're going to do 15 minutes or so of radio banter, and then we'll get things going. Thank you.
Hey, Pat.
Yes?
I need to fix something in your microphone real quick.
I'll be right there.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Overture Center in downtown Madison, Wisconsin. We are 1 block away from the state's Capitol building here on a beautiful evening here in March. Welcome to our special evening of Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election coming up on April 1st. And we are just a couple of hours away from a very important debate tonight between the two candidates for the Wisconsin State Supreme Court. But first, we're going to have a little bit of fun here. As for those watching in the hall, you might hear some applause, hopefully not some booze. But Pat Kreitlow's in the house, so he has lots of fans here in the house. For those
Hold for applause.
Look at that, fantastic.
I want to thank the folks at the radio station for bringing up the applause sound effect. Like that.
For those of us listening across the Civic Media Radio Network, we want to thank Civic Media for hosting this event tonight, because I think it's just so important to have these discussions in long form, as they say, of broadcasting, not in the little snippets that are being advertised, 30-second sound bites or pamphlets at the door or on our smartphones or whatever, but actual real conversations. So to all of our folks across Wisconsin on all 11 news talk stations, congratulations from the shores of Green Bay to the shores of Lake Michigan, Green Bay to the Mississippi River, and all points in between. My name's Todd Albaugh. I host a little program on civic media between noon and 2 every day. But really the person that got this all started is my friend and colleague. He is the host of Up North News Radio every morning on civic media between 6 and 8. He is also the founder, one of the co-founders of the Courier News Service, and of course of Up North News Radio, Mr. Pat Kreitlow. Pat, good evening to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Albaugh. Let's introduce our third moderator here, Mr. Shafer. He's a very vital part of this team.
Absolutely, we're happy to have him. You might know him as a person that when you might feel a little discombobulated, he recombobulates you. He is the founder of the great news source, the Recombobulation Area, and also now we're proud to say our political editor here at Civic Media, Mr. Dan Shafer. Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well, Todd. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, Pat, for having me join this wonderful event you're all putting.
I always feel better. I feel more combobulated once you're here.
That's what I aim to do. It's a very, very discombobulating time, is it not?
It really is.
And we're going to try to discombobulate or recombobulate a little bit of it for you here. So again, our thanks to Civic Media for helping provide broadcasting for this, the first ever live event for Up North News. Up North News is a separate entity from Civic Media. Courier Newsroom is our parent company with outlets in 10 plus states right now that help to try to make state and especially political news approachable to audiences who may not be regular blog readers and podcast listeners and somebody that still feels newsprint in their hands, on Sunday mornings. But these are still important issues, and we want to try to explain the issues to folks. And it occurred to us with this state Supreme Court race happening on April 1st that this was a perfect opportunity to hold our first live event, bring in some experts, bring in some lawmakers, bring in some trusted voices, break it down into 3 major areas, and then find out what our guests think about that in terms of the significance of the race. With an open seat on the state Supreme Court, which is what this is all about, which will decide control of the court by liberals or conservatives. In these 3 areas, there can be just a tremendous sea change. I'm going to be hosting the third panel, moderating the third panel, I should say, which will be about reproductive rights. You probably don't need me to say much about that, but our experts are going to have a lot to say about that because, again, who shows up on Election Day truly determines the course of reproductive rights in the state. Dan's going to have the second panel, so let's have you say just a bit about the economy and the people that you're going to be talking to during the course of today's event.
Yeah, we've got a great panel. We're going to be talking a little bit about how this election will have an impact on the economy and on working people, everyday people here in the state of Wisconsin. You don't always think of a judicial election necessarily as having a connection to the economy, but so many of the decisions that are made by the state Supreme Court do have an impact on so many different aspects of our economy right now, and it's never been more important as we've seen to have some good checks and balances seems pretty important right about now. I don't know, for a variety of reasons.
Yeah.
Checks, balances. I don't know. We haven't heard that much about that.
No, it's really just been about checks and the ones that a billionaire is writing. But we'll get to that. And then the first panel of the evening will be about education. And Todd, you'll be moderating that one.
Yeah, looking forward to it. I come from a family of educators, so it's something near and dear to my heart. But more importantly, we have some wonderful folks, and we'll introduce them here in a moment. And you've curated a great panel in that we have somebody from the legal side, because I think there's so many legal questions, obviously, a Supreme Court race. And people say, well, what in the world does a Supreme Court race outcome have to do with education? Well, it turns out quite a lot in terms of protecting students' rights and protecting educators' rights. And then there was a little something that I'm not sure if you remember, Pat, Act 10.
I'm somewhat familiar, yes.
So we'll talk about that.
Okay. So much that we're going to cover in those 3 topic areas. We hope you find it very informative. Josh Clemens, come on up for a second. We want to visit with you as well because, while we're talking to experts in their field and lawmakers, there's also no shortage of people who communicate about politics through all sorts of ways. I mean, it used to be it was just, either you were a TV anchor or a radio reporter, you were an ink-stained wretch in a newspaper someplace, but now there are these things called influencers and content creators and podcasters, And Josh, you have just a little bit of experience in digital communications, so thanks for joining us for a couple of moments to talk about this.
Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I'm very honored to get to speak to a lot of people every day about what's going on in Wisconsin politics. Anybody here on TikTok? Anybody here recognize me? If not, we should connect.
Should have told them it's radio and not to raise their hands, but that's okay.
There's a crowd here, and they all raise their hands.
That's it. There.
And those at home should also be raising their hands. So I work in politics. I have the honor of working with a lot of amazing progressives throughout Wisconsin and nationally, but I also spend a lot of time talking directly to voters and potential voters on TikTok, and that is where a lot of my energy these days seems to go, because every year we have another existential race that we have to win or democracy dies, and that is something that I am unfortunately perennially focused on, as are all of you, I am sure. It's exhausting. It's not how this is supposed to work, but here we are, and we've got another one next year that we have to win, and another one the year after that, so it just keeps on going and going. But yeah, happy to talk about it.
And the whole notion behind this is to not take democracy for granted, something I never thought we'd have to say in our lifetimes. But for a while now, that's something we ignore at our peril. And it's one thing for, let's say Dan writes a 1,000-word column for the recombobulation area.
So one on the short end.
Yes, yeah. Todd's got 2 hours every day on radio, as do I. But in TikTok, I mean, you've got to make that point quickly, or people are scrolling right to the next thing. So can you talk just a bit about the challenge and the importance of reaching people who may not be subscribing to any of those typical political sites? They're on TikTok. What can you say? How can you get that attention about the importance of this race in short order?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, anybody who's out there trying to do this on social, anywhere, it doesn't matter if it's TikTok or otherwise, remember that you're talking to a lot of people who don't know the facts, and that's okay. Like, there's no shame in not knowing what's going on. It's hard to keep up with this. We do it for a living, and it's still hard to keep up with it. My goal, every time I log on to TikTok, is to try to bring people along on the journey that I'm on. And as far as how I'm talking about this race specifically, democracy is counting on us. I say this all the time. If you see me on TikTok, you've seen it. This is not a race about Democrats versus Republicans. This is a race about democracy versus the end of democracy. There are 3 reasons why we have to win this race, why Susan Crawford has to win. If Susan Crawford doesn't win, we are going to have gerrymandered maps again. And I think a lot of people have not processed that after 15 years of fighting for fair maps, we literally might only have them for a single cycle before we go right back to gerrymandered maps, and that is a horrifying notion to a lot of people. The second reason is we need our courts to recognize that elections matter. North Carolina Supreme Court has made it abundantly clear that Republican courts do not recognize the will of the voters to pick their elected officials, and we cannot afford a court that it's even in question. And the third reason is that if we lose this race, we are telling the world that democracy is for sale, that every election is for sale to the highest bidder. And I have bad news for all of us. Elon will always be the highest bidder. And that is not a world that we want to live in, one where Elon Musk gets to pick his candidate in each and every cycle moving forward. So that's my 3 reasons. I hope I captivated you as long as I captivated TikTok audience. And that's yours. Take it, use it. Like, we're all in this together. Each and every one of us has to be sharing that message every single day with every person we know, because paid organizers are not going to win this thing. Susan Crawford is not going to win this thing. We are going to win this thing, and that is how we have to approach every election. It's not about the candidate at the top. It's not about the candidate's team. It's about us. We together have to save democracy, because it's us who will pay the price if we lose.
I'm sorry, I'd already scrolled to this meeting.
I lost it. Should I make a joke and bring it back?
There was a cat with a laser pointer, but anyway, no. This is the challenge that we've got, is this little device. We can use it. I think often, I really do, of Edward R. Murrow's speech from 1956, I believe it was, that, he was talking about TV, but it could be just about any screen, that it can educate, it can illuminate, it can inform, or it can be lights and wires in a box. And we know how often that's happened, but we still know the value of information that is packaged right and presented to people in a way that motivates them to believe in something that maybe they think is hokey, they think is maybe beneath them, politics, but these things are important. They're critical. You know this. If you're listening to this broadcast, if you're in this room at the beautiful Overture Center here in Madison, you get the importance of this. But you all have friends, neighbors, a sibling, somebody, and they reach out to you, sometimes from the voting booth. I swear it has happened to me, going, who am I voting for this thing? And whether it's that close to the casting the ballot or a couple of weeks before, like we are right now, you folks are the ones who can take in information from events like this and help people truly understand that you don't just show up once every 4 years when there's a presidential election. Democracy is truly a full-time endeavor here, Dan. You need people to be as informed as we can make them, which, as Josh just said, there's varying levels of how much people want to be informed, but we have to try to do our part.
Absolutely. Democracy is built from the ground up, I think, as Josh was alluding to here, and we can't take any plays off. In Wisconsin, we are over and over again, we have these everything on the line elections because that's the state of our politics. That's where we are right now. And I think for those of us, in this room, those of us, who have, a lot of TikTok followers, perhaps, we can really make an impact because the turnout matters so much. And so for those of you in this room, I always think of this analogy that the band The Velvet Underground only sold like 1,000 copies of their first record. But every one of those people who bought that record started their own band. So you guys are here buying that record. We need you to go out and start your own band and spread the word about this election and how important it is to the state of Wisconsin.
I like that, man. That's the clip I'm going to put on TikTok when this is all said and done.
You're welcome.
So this is not a polished TV production. You're going to see us just kind of walking around at times because we have one set of stairs, so we're about to have a traffic jam here as a couple of us move stage left and the members of our first panel start to come on. Todd, you can stay there.
Thank you very much.
Your knees aren't getting in yet.
I appreciate it. A big round of applause for our folks here. And for those listening on the radio, we are going to take a 1-minute break to allow the people here to set up. So if we're ready back at the old home studio across the street, as it turns out, stay with us. You're listening to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election on April 1st, presented by Up North News Radio here on the Civic Media Radio Network. The street every day. The hosts just sit here and act smart. It's the guys, the tech people, the producers who actually make us sound good. A big round of applause for Chris Casper over there. How about that? Yeah. That would be a question for Mr. Kreitlow. I'm not sure. The question was, are you going to do this around other places of the state, was the question.
Not before this election, but if you all behave yourself really well,
hey, Kristen,
and this is a success,
good to see you.
We're going to do it for every election from now on all over. Yeah.
Look at that.
You're the best guinea pigs ever.
All right, here we go. Stand by. And welcome back to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations with about this Wisconsin Supreme Court election on April 1st. I'm Todd Albaugh from Civic Media. We are here as our main sponsor. The presenting sponsor of this is Up North News Radio. And of course, one of the founders, Pat Kreitlow, my colleague here, who is on the air every morning from 6 until 8. You are listening to us across the Civic Media Radio Network. This is a live event, and we are down at the beautiful Overture Center here in downtown Madison, as it turns out, right across the street from our world headquarters here. And glad to have you all along. And thanks to everybody who showed up here in person. We are beginning the evening. We have a number of panels throughout the evening, so we're kind of going to reset here. And look at this. We're back from our commercial break, and we have 4 wonderful, fine people. And this part of the panel, this part of the evening, is a panel on public education. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart. I think this is why Pat was so kind to ask me to moderate it. I grew up in a little town called Richland Center, 5,000 people in southwest Wisconsin. My maternal grandmother started as a farm girl, and my great-grandfather didn't think girls should get an education beyond the 8th grade, and she was a bohemian and didn't think that was really great. And so she left home at 14 and ended up getting not just her high school diploma, but her college degree. And fast forward, she ended up being the first woman to be a dean in the state of Wisconsin at UW Richland. Marge Wallace was her name. So she was a great woman and a great inspiration in my life. Both my parents, actually, three, my stepmom, have been teachers now since retired. And my sister and brother-in-law are educators in the Eau Claire Public School District. But enough about that. I have a passion for this. That's my point. So I appreciate having all of you here. I'm going to go down the line here. Each of you give us 30 seconds to 1 minute on yourselves. A quick little introduction. Speaking of Eau Claire, ladies and gentlemen, here's a guy who started out as kind of a student and activist, and now a freshman representative in the state assembly, the one, the only, Christian Phelps. Representative Phelps, congratulations and welcome.
Todd's brother-in-law was one of my teachers in 7th grade.
Boy, do I feel old.
Yeah, I'm Christian Phelps, and I was born and raised in Eau Claire. I actually have a lot of extended family in Madison, and I worked in public schools in Wisconsin for 2 years. When I did that, it was the 2 years of my life that I lived in Madison, so familiar with both places. And I have just been really frustrated and mad about the state of affairs and the way that the state treats young people for as long as I can remember. Was 17 when Act 10 was introduced, for example, so my entire adult life has been in this sort of attack on public education world. And so eventually that led me to various different roles, including running for the state assembly last year and being elected in November.
Well, you've lowered the median age considerably. Congratulations. Next up on our panel, Peggy Wirtz-Olson from WIAC.
Good afternoon, or evening, I guess it is. My name is Peggy Wirtz-Olson. I am a high school art and English teacher. I grew up in Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, so if you're familiar with that part of the state. I am a member of the Marshfield Teachers Association, so Central Wisconsin is my home local. Hey, thanks for applauding for that. And I'm currently serving as the president of the Wisconsin Education Association Council. So I've been teaching for 27 years, so certainly lived changes within the profession in that time, and was active teacher and president of my local union when, as Christian referenced, Act 10 happened here in Wisconsin.
Well, great. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Well, round of applause. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Next up, another great organization that I've had the opportunity to be at their events. They do great work, the Wisconsin Public Education Network, and here representing them, Heather Dubois-Bournon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Dubois-Bournon. I'm Executive Director of Wisconsin Public Education Network. I am a public school parent and a former educator. And I kind of got radicalized by Scott Walker. And when I was working on my PhD at UW-Madison, was right around the time that Act 10 happened, and you know, this budget-busting bill came out that just decimated school funding in this state. And at the same time, I had an outreach job at UW where I was going around to different schools around the state and seeing with my own eyes the disparities, sometimes just blocks apart, between schools that seemed to have every resource a kid could need and schools where you couldn't even drink out of the drinking fountains because there was lead in the pipes in the building. And I thought, what? How did this happen here? Who let this occur, and who's doing something about it? And so sort of looking for other people who were as mad as I was, and I found them at Wisconsin Public Education Network, and they were like, we need somebody to get us organized. And I was like, can it be me? And so we've been organizing people all over the state to just kind of tap into that frustration with those disparities and invite people who share our concerns and who agree that every single kid in every single public school deserves equal access to an equally excellent school, should get that. And when the state isn't meeting its obligation, it's up to us to demand they do.
Great. Thank you for being here, Heather. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. And last but not least, University of Wisconsin-Madison Professor Emeritus Julie Mead. Julie?
Yes, hello. Hi, my name is Julie Mead. I was born in Edgerton, but don't tell this against me. I was raised in northwestern Illinois, but always close to Wisconsin. I am the product of public education all the way through to my PhD, so it's really, really important to me. I began as a teacher of children who are deaf and hard of hearing, so special education is kind of my thing. In fact, my very first year of teaching was the first year that what is now the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act had to be implemented across the country. And so I have, as a professional, grown up with that law. And so not surprisingly, I began to study that law, and I studied that law in particular the intersection of programs for disabilities or the rights of kids with disabilities and our burgeoning kinds of school choice. So I have done quite a bit of studying around vouchers and charters. And yes, I am retired from the university, but I'm not retired from advocacy for public education.
Thanks, Julie. Really appreciate it. All right, for those listening on the Civic Media Radio Network, you were listening to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race election, which is, of course, April Fool's, no joking. Be a voter, as my colleague Luke Mathers likes to say. If you want to check your voter registration or to register online, go to myvote.wi.gov. That's myvote.wi.gov. Of all the things you're going to hear tonight, either in person or online, that is it right there. Be a voter and get out, because as our previous people said, that's the only way that we are all going to make a difference together. All right, we got 15 minutes. Kreitlow will have a hook. He'll pull me off of here if I don't keep you to it. So let's get right into it. Let's have a discussion. Julie, let's start with you. Okay. The big question, and anybody can hop in here. People say, Todd, why in the heck should I care about education for a Supreme Court race? What does the Supreme Court have to do from a legal perspective with education?
Well, a lot. And in fact, remember that we're voting for someone who's going to be on that bench for 10 years. So think of all of the things that can come up in a 10-year span. But we have a whole lot of things that are ripe for discussion right now that I think we need to pay attention to. In particular, I think we need to pay attention to that legislative obligation, Christian, to be funding public education, and whether or not our legislators have abdicated that responsibility. And so there's likely, I would guess, maybe not, but we want to have someone on the bench who understands that constitutional obligation and the investment that our grandparents and great-grandparents made when they crafted that constitutional obligation to fund public education so that it would be, as it says, as nearly uniform as practicable. In addition to that, of course, in 2 years, the limits on our voucher programs will expire. And so all of the press that we currently have around school choice and some of the issues in school choice, those are likely to burgeon and become even more pressing for schools and school districts. And so that's an issue that might come up. And then, well, there are a host of others, the revenue limits, the issues of censorship, students' rights, employees' rights. So there are a whole host of things that could come up.
Representative Phelps, let's go to you next, because you can make the argument that you're the benefactor of a new Supreme Court in that this current Supreme Court redid the maps and made them fairer. You're in one of those redistricted districts. But talk for a minute. Democrats have made gains, certainly this last election. You're still in the minority in the legislature. The governor is a Democrat, obviously. But what does it mean to you as a minority member of the Assembly is trying to get something done to have a Supreme Court that's not going to legislate from the bench, but actually interpret laws as written?
Yeah. Good question. I think that the Supreme Court, as one of the three branches of government, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that they are supposed to be a check on ours. I think they were correct to say that the previous legislature, having drawn maps to so heavily advantage their majority, was not right. And so, you know, the Eau Claire area actually had some of the biggest change in our legislative maps, and where we used to have no competitive districts, we now have only competitive districts, which is how it should be. And Unfortunately, the majority still holds a lot of control. And so I serve on the Assembly Committee on Education. Last session, there were about two-thirds of the Assembly was Republican and 1/3 was Democratic. And that was the ratio on our committees as well. But I think not many people are aware of the fact that the majority, the Speaker, still sets committee ratios no matter what the body looks like. And this year, the ratio on committees is still 2/3, 1/3, even though we are 54-45 in the body. So we are up against kind of a brick wall as minority members of the committee, where there are 9 Republicans and 4 Democrats. Stopping bills is pretty close to impossible because of the number of Republicans that we would have to get to break with their leader. And I think it's worth mentioning that Julie brings up the constitutional obligation to fund public schools, which I believe we've fallen short of for all the reasons she enumerated. Our committee has already spent 3 full taxpayer-funded days, and so far we have discussed cursive, pronouns, locker rooms, the semantics of our test scores, and not once have we discussed the special ed funding gap, the revenue limits, the voucher program, or the fact that we're $3,500 per student behind the funding levels of 2009. So we need a Supreme Court that's going to check and balance a legislature if it continues to be this bad at meeting our constitutional obligation.
Peggy, I want to go to you. I want to go to you because from an educator's standpoint, as I said, I have family or educators, but talk to us around Wisconsin right now for a moment. As this state has a dearth, a shortage of young people going into education. And people say, why on earth would I want to go to Platteville or Milwaukee or any of our great university schools to go into education when after Act 10, as was talked about before, it's tough right now. So what does this mean having a fair court to an educator?
I think that as an educator, right, a fair court is critically important to the issues that we've all been discussing tonight. You know, one thing that I will lift up is around our students' issues and needs in the classrooms. The educator's ability to teach truth, I think, is something I want to mention tonight. And I also want to mention, you know, that real desire for an educator to be able to make ends meet at the end of the day. So you referenced, you know, going to a university, right, and the bills that come with that, and then classroom, you know, being in a classroom with our students every single day, making sure that the resources our students have are adequate and really meeting the needs of what those students in the classroom have. And at the end of the day, that we're not in this virtuous cycle of one referendum after another in our schools to keep the doors open and the lights on. So all of those issues, and when I think about the students' needs in the room, every student's learning conditions are really the educator's working conditions.
And these folks are dedicated to our kids. Talk for a minute, because I think this is something that goes under talked about. I'm on live radio. I'm not as good a live person as we are on tape. But talk for a second, the real impact, because we hear Act 10. Oh, they want more vacation or they want more money. No. Let's talk for a second from an educator's standpoint. Real families, because when Act 10 came in, what individual teachers were paying for health care, for out-of-pocket expenses, and that means educators are paying more, and in many places in our community, one spouse works for a school district, and the other spouse is a plumber, or an electrician, or a baker, or has a child care business in their home. Talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, so dollars and cents, I think, are a piece of what we're talking about tonight, and they're a piece of what is impacting every educator I talk to. Educators who have second and third jobs, and we know the work in the classroom is important in helping our students thrive, and that reach, teach, and inspire that every educator wants to do is tough to do when you're working that second and third job. Mm-hmm. The erosion of healthcare benefits is something I do want to mention tonight that has been an impact, where educators' benefits nowhere even closely match up to the benefits of a part-time legislator like Christian at this point. So every educator wants to see every student in their classroom succeed. The challenge is with going into a profession where you know at the end of the day that may not be the case is a piece to what we're seeing, what we're facing. I'm going to share one brief story, and that's from a colleague of mine, a 2-educator household who's about to have his first child. Last week, tearfully talked with me about their fear that they're not able to pay for childcare for a new baby in a 2-educator household.
Incredible.
Those are real concerns.
And we listen to Up North News Radio from 6 to 8 every morning with Pat Kreitlow. He does a great job of telling these stories. Unfortunately, that is not a singular story. There are people like that all across Wisconsin. Heather, you're on the show so much with Pat on Up North News Radio. Always appreciate when you come on. One of the things that you bring is this experience of Wisconsin Public Education Network going all over the state. Talk for us about a second, because we know that our school districts, particularly in places where I'm from, Richland Center, or Ithaca, Wisconsin, a great school district, even smaller than Richland Center, they are our communities. But public education, public school districts have to take all students by law as it is. Talk to us about what the difference between public districts face versus private districts or voucher districts.
People are often shocked to learn that when they choose to send their child to a private school on a voucher, they give up certain rights and protections for those kids. Private schools are not required, like public schools are, to meet the needs of students with disabilities. They can openly discriminate against students for any reason, and sometimes do. They can use corporal punishment. They do not have to hire licensed teachers. They don't play by the same set of rules, and kids are at risk in these environments, and we should not be using taxpayer dollars to fund any programs that put kids at risk. And so that is a huge issue for folks. The other thing that I think folks don't realize is all the opportunities that democracy already affords us to have a say in our child's education when they attend a public school. You can show up at school board meetings. You can review all curricula. You can have a relationship with your child's educator in ways that are not guaranteed to you if you send your child to a private school. And while people might make those choices for all kinds of very good reasons, if you want to protect and preserve those rights, then the choice is to go public. And that's super important. Also, people want their kids to have a thriving education. They want their schools to be joyful places where kids have all the resources they need and where educators feel valued and want to go to work because they know that they're valued by kids and by families and by communities, and that everybody feels welcome and safe in our buildings. And if we aren't holding the state accountable for meeting those obligations in our public schools, then we're doing something very wrong. And so we need to prioritize those priority needs before we fool around with throwing money away in programs that are wholly unaccountable to us.
All right, speed round. Kreitlow's giving me the high sign here. We got 4.5 minutes left, so short answers if we can, please. Heather, I'm going to start quickly with you. Again, rights of students. Students do have rights, quickly.
Students do have rights, and if you are concerned, like many of us are, about all of the attacks that we're seeing, both at the state level, the federal level, sometimes at the school board level, not protecting the rights of LGBTQ plus students, not protecting the rights of immigrant kids and their families, not protecting the rights of educators to teach the truth in welcoming environments. These are all things that matter deeply up and down your entire ballot, from school board to the state superintendent race to the Supreme Court race. And also, if you're sick of raising taxes on yourself to pay for public schools to be open and thriving, and you want to shut down this system of referendum, let's hold the state accountable for funding.
Julie, let's go quickly to you on this issue of immigration, because we could do a whole evening just on that. But very quickly, Eau Claire, we had Mike Johnson, the superintendent of Eau Claire Public Schools, on the show. He's been on Pat's show before, Up North News Radio. Talk quickly, if you can, please, just why, again, a fair Wisconsin State Supreme Court could have an effect on these immigration issues and how they're handled in public education.
Well, Immigration is, largely a federal issue, but schools and how schools operate and how schools manage those things are state and local issues. And so understanding, of course, that all kids, regardless of where they come from, when they're in our communities, have a right, as the United States Supreme Court has said, have a right to an education and have to be welcomed, valued, and taught. And so I think understanding that we have to exist in that particular situation, we have to help kids understand, and there are all kinds of heartbreaking stories right now about kids being afraid of what's going to happen when they're at school to their parents and a whole variety of things. So I think just understanding what school districts can do, but mostly how they can welcome all kids regardless of where they're from.
Representative Phelps, 1 minute, one more minute left after that. From a legislative standpoint, again, do you have goals? Do you see any hope of working with your Republican colleagues right now, or is this a go it alone and rely on a fair court?
Both, because there's a long-term battle that we can win if we build enough political power, which we do partly through the messages that we're sending in the Capitol. Just like I represent a competitive district, so do most of my Republican colleagues. And so, for example, the voucher issue, I think for the reasons Heather mentioned, it's no coincidence that the people pushing a Christian nationalist agenda are the ones supporting school privatization. The people in the rural communities that I represent, the public school families, are alarmed and horrified to learn that they are losing funds to private schools when there isn't even a private school in those communities.
Yeah.
I think my Republican colleagues have to answer for that, and if they don't do it in this session, if we're loud enough, they will eventually.
Peggy, 30 seconds. Sorry about that. From a teacher's standpoint, why is this race important to you?
Well, I hope that every voter in Wisconsin thinks about the partnership between them and their local school district in this election. I know that our students' future depends on impartial justices who will uphold the Constitution and keep our communities and our schools safe, and understand that importance for a great public education for every student in Wisconsin.
Representative Christian Phelps, Peggy Wirtz, Olson, Heather Dubois, Bornan, and Julie Mead, thank you all for being here. We appreciate a big round of applause. We appreciate you all being here. Education is so important, and this race matters. Be a voter on April 1st. Stay tuned now. We're going to take a quick break for those listening across civic media on our live coverage here. We'll be back in 1 minute. You're listening to Protecting Justice for All, an evening of conversations about the Wisconsin Supreme Court election, and you're listening to the Civic Media Radio Network. Thanks, you guys. Hi, friend, come on in.
All right, welcome back, everybody, to Up North News' first ever live event, Protecting Justice for All, as we talk about the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race election that is taking place on April 1st. We're talking primarily about the issues involve, the topics, the subjects, more so than the individual candidates. You may hear references to Judge Susan Crawford. You may hear references to Waukesha County Judge Brad Schimmel. But we really wanted to make sure that from an overarching standpoint, how does this affect life in Wisconsin in the areas that, as you just heard, might impact on education, or in this case, for our next panel, on the economy, and coming up shortly, we'll be talking about the impact on reproductive rights as well. But our second panel has taken the stage. Dan Shafer, political editor from Civic Media, and the founder of the Recombobulation Area, is joining us to moderate that panel on the impact of the Wisconsin Supreme Court election on the Wisconsin economy. Dan, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Kreitlow, and thank you all for being here. Again, my name is Dan Shafer. I am the founder of a little publication called The Recombobulation Area. Yes, it is named after the famous post-security area in the Milwaukee airport. I think with the discombobulating politics that we have in Wisconsin, we all need a place to recombobulate. So go ahead and subscribe and join us at the Recombobulation Area as we make sense of things here in the state of Wisconsin. I'm also now the political editor at Civic Media, and hello to our listeners across the state on the Civic Media Network. So, we are now less than 3 weeks away from yet another everything on the line election here in Wisconsin. So before we jump into our panel discussion, I want to see where all of you out in the audience are at with this election. So obviously, since we're streaming live on the radio, we'll ask you to clap instead of a show of hands here. So I want you to clap if the answer is yes. So how many of you are registered voters? Love to hear it. Love to hear it. How many of you have a plan to vote in the spring election? Who is voting early? Who is voting on Election Day? How many of you have already voted absentee? All right, very interesting. And how many of you are encouraging others to vote? Let me ask that one more time. How many of you are encouraging others to vote? There we go. So this panel is about the economy and the impact of this election on the Wisconsin economy. How are we all feeling about the economy right now? Maybe a little iffy? All right, so this is going to be an important panel. So we don't always think of the courts as playing a major role in the economy, but the decisions made by the Wisconsin Supreme Court have a far-reaching impact on a myriad of issues affecting things like job creation, everyday affordability, a changing climate, and justice for consumers and workers. So first, let's check in with our panel. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself briefly and then answer this question. How could this election impact the economy here in Wisconsin? We'll start right here with State Representative Francesca Hong.
Good evening, everyone. I'm State Representative Francesca Hong. I represent the 76th District here in Madison. Welcome to the 76th. And what Dan said was right. Everything is on the line. And I think how this Supreme Court race is going to impact the economy, I think it's going to directly undermine and harm the care economy. And when I say care economy, I'm talking about long-term care, investing in caregivers, child care, early education, as well as paid medical and sick leave, because we do not have a workforce that works for the working family unless we have care. And if we can't pass these policies unless we have fair maps. So with a swing in the state Supreme Court, we could go back to a rigged map system where we have a majority party whose power was artificially built on rigged maps. So that's what's on the line, is care for our future, and it matters even more now because we've got an aging state, and we want to make sure that those folks are taken care of and new families have the resources they need to have success in their own home and be able to take care of themselves.
Greetings, everybody. I'm Supreme Moore Omokunde. I'm a state representative, and I represent the 17th Assembly District in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So everything that's happening at the federal level right now is probably going to end up in court at some point. One. Two, The 10th Amendment of the United States guarantees the state its rights that are not specifically taken on by the federal government. So we're going to find ourselves in state court a lot. So whoever has the majority on the Supreme Court is going to be making a lot of decisions on contracts because of executive orders that have dismissed contracts, whether they be for Inflation Reduction Act dollars and impoundment federal dollars that the Congress has determined should go to the states. We're going to end up in court over that. And so whoever has that majority on the court is going to help us determine and make a decision that's going to have a great effect on our economy.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Melissa Baldauff. I am a Democratic strategist. I am a frequent guest with Pat Kreitlow on Up North News. I do a weekly segment with him called Climate Check, where we talk about all things climate. I previously worked for Governor Evers in the administration, managing communications. And I think that I'm also, as an aside, I want to point out I am married to this lovely gentleman here, Joe Zepecki. And I will also note that we did not coordinate these outfits. The guys happen to be wearing the literal exact same jacket. And Representative Hong and I just, kind of both wear black a lot. So anyway, in addition to the great points they made, I would just say our democracy is on the line with this court election when it comes down to things like you look at the decision that came down regarding drop boxes and people being able to access their right to vote, being able to participate in the process fairly when it comes to who's getting on the ballot, when it comes to things like fake electors determining how our votes will be counted. The Supreme Court is going to make decisions like that. So really, the court is going to decide make really big decisions about our democracy, about our ability to participate in elections fairly. And so it's incredibly important that we have those fair, impartial justices making those decisions.
And I have the hardest job of all. How do you do better than your better half? I'm Joe Zepecki. I think the credential that got me on the economy panel is during President Obama's first term, I was a political appointee at the U.S. Small Business Administration, which was probably the coolest job I ever had, working with entrepreneurs, making sure they had access to capital. But I'm not going to talk about that. And I'm not going to talk about the great points that they made. I'm going to talk about the raw politics of it, because that's what I do these days. And I am here to tell you that there are certain rules of political gravity that still apply, okay? Not all of them. Mr. Trump has changed the calculus a little bit. But there are rules and laws of political gravity. And the extraordinary opportunity that we have in Wisconsin in just 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, is to be the first voters anywhere in the United States, and we're in a battleground state, to send a message that is stop, enough. This is not what people voted for. The American people, including a lot of Trump voters, who we got to find a way to have a conversation with, they didn't vote for an international trade war. They didn't vote for laying off tens of thousands of veterans. They didn't vote for your 401k to be taking a nosedive 50 days into their administration. And if we turn out on April 1st and we get a big win for the candidate we're all supporting, that isn't just good for the next 10 years in Wisconsin. It sends a message to people in Washington, like I don't know some Republican congressman who could use a spine to say you are losing the American people. That's what's at stake, and that to me gets right to the heart of the economy.
Thank you to all of our panelists here. So elections for Wisconsin Supreme Court are kind of weird, right? You want to ask these candidates their thoughts and their views on the issues, but oftentimes they'll retreat back to these themes of impartiality or not wanting to judge a case before it's before them, etc. But at the same time, it's becoming increasingly clear that voters want to know this type of information. In the latest Marquette University Law School poll, 79% of registered voters said judicial candidates should discuss issues on the campaign. But for many voters, they don't have a clear idea of what the candidates stand for. For Brad Schimmel, the poll showed that about half of registered voters either don't know what he stands for or haven't heard enough, and that number is up at about 60% for Susan Crawford. So what have you heard from candidates in this election that tells you how they might rule on these economic issues that you all just talked about as being important in this race, if and when they're seated on the bench? Melissa, let's start with you.
Okay. I'll tell you the thing that I heard that tells me the most about one of these candidates, and it's Brad Schimmel. And what I heard him say is that he needs some knee pads to go beg for money from donors. And what that tells me about Brad Schimmel is that he is for sale to the highest bidder. And we already know that when he was Attorney General, he refused to take action against pharmaceutical companies and hold them accountable for what they have done to devastate communities across Wisconsin and across the country, wrecking communities with the opioid crisis and this epidemic that has impacted virtually every single family. He refused to hold them accountable. At the same time, he took thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars from this industry. So we know that he is for sale to the highest bidder. By his own admission, he is wearing out knee pads left and right, talking about he has to go to Menards and buy them in bulk. So we know by his own admission that he's for sale. So that's what I'm hearing. That tells me a whole lot about where he stands.
Representative Omokunde.
Thank you. I know you mentioned that they just talk about impartiality and things of that nature. However, I think things like impartiality and commitment to judicial principles and jurisprudence, those are important things. And right now we have folks at the federal level who are not committed to that at all. We're going to be in a constitutional crisis with many of the executive orders that have been administered and whether or not they impose upon the freedoms and the rights of the legislative branch. We need somebody who is going to be impartial. We need somebody who is going to look at the rules of jurisprudence and judicial principles. And Brad Schimmel's not that guy, unfortunately. And if we have somebody on that court, we're already looking at people who are saying, oh, just wait till April 1st. After April 1st happens, we can get our old maps back. After we get our old maps back, we can go back to the gerrymandered state of Wisconsin, and we can have the 3-to-1 margin, and we can override any of the governor's vetoes that we want. We need to have someone who is going to be judiciously principled in the seat and on the court, the highest court in the state of Wisconsin, to help us kind of determine what some of these laws are going to be in the state of Wisconsin after they come through our courts and come down from the federal government as well.
I have one other thing I just wanted to add regarding Brad Schimmel kind of being for sale. Just to point out that we now have Elon Musk having spent about $8 million to date investing in this race to try to influence it. And guess who's going to have business before this court regarding Tesla? If you guessed Elon Musk, you're right. So what do you think he might expect in exchange for his investment? Because we saw what he's getting in exchange for his investment in the presidential race, which is unfettered access to the federal government and the ability to dismantle it at his will.
Honey, are you suggesting that it's not coincidence that 48 hours after Tesla filed suit in state court that the pocketbook opened? Wow.
Did you guys rehearse this?
We didn't.
Beforehand?
No.
That was pretty good.
Right.
Representative Hong.
This is about standing up for our Wisconsin values: freedom, fairness, democracy, our rights. And you can either have a judge who is going to destroy all those by answering to co-presidents, and we already know this based on the mailers that have been sent out and the ads that they are running, that you're going to have a judge who answers to Trump and Musk, or you're going to have a judge that answers to the people. And we want someone that shares the values that I know all Wisconsinites have, and that's of fairness, that's of freedom, that's of rights, and that's of democracy.
So next question, a little bit closer to home. The state's largest business lobby, Wisconsin Manufacturers and Commerce, has been especially litigious over the years. Would that be a fair way to characterize that?
I would say so.
What would concern you about a return to a right-wing control of the court in their dealings with the state's largest business lobby?
Well, we're seeing this shift in the playing field, and we have for a very long time, where big gets bigger, begets even bigger, right? And it is tilting the playing field against working families. We are seeing this on full display, of course, with Musk now, the grossest embodiment of it at the federal level. Who is going to speak up for the small business owner? Who is going to speak up for the people working for small businesses? When we're talking about economic fairness, we're talking about an ability to get ahead, but before a court of law, we're talking about just access to justice. That if you are a worker who is wronged, if you are a worker who is sent to work in an unsafe environment and gets a devastating injury, you need to be able to get justice for that. And the more power we give to big businesses that are only getting bigger, the less power that we the people have, that workers have. We need a government, all three branches, that is more reflective of people who work for a living than people who are bosses for a living and talk on the phone all day and watch the market all day.
I'll jump in and say to anybody out there, if you voted for Donald Trump and you're pissed off or you feel that you've been duped, you should feel pissed off. You have been. Like my colleague said, that this is not what you voted for. Oftentimes you have big businesses, and y'all laid it out perfectly. You have these big businesses, they have this principle called ROI, return on investment. And they put their money out, and this is why they supported a Donald Trump. This is why they have an Elon Musk in the White House right now, or ransacking any department that he can, because they want a return on their investment. They want to do well, and they don't want to pay for it. That's what a lot of wealthy people do. They want investments, they want things that they own that they didn't have to pay for. I just got into a conversation about building sports arenas last night with a cousin of mine. And you always have these large owners who want sports arenas, but they want the people to pay for it. You have these billionaires who want to get everything and have the people pay for it. That's what Donald Trump and Elon Musk are doing at the federal level. There's a $4.5 trillion tax cut that they're fleecing the government to pay for billionaires and millionaires. And we at the state of Wisconsin have the opportunity to, like my colleague said, to push back against that and say the people in Wisconsin, we want to make decisions for ourselves. And we're able to do that not only for the Supreme Court, but at the education level in the state of Wisconsin.
So the Wisconsin Supreme Court has also ruled on a number of issues when it comes to environmental protection and conservation. And in the age of a changing climate, this has major economic implications as well. Melissa, we'll start with you, since you've talked a bit about this on the Climate Check segment on Up North News Radio. What are some of the ways this election could impact the environment in Wisconsin?
Great question. So yeah, we know that that the Republicans have been very hostile to climate progress in Wisconsin. And I know our friends here in the legislature are no stranger to that. I know that Representative Omokunde has a bill out right now and has had multiple bills on climate action that have gone nowhere. But what's really concerning about this election is the ability to, I think you made the point earlier, to stop any of the federal funds coming into this state from the IRA, to stop any of the action that is happening in this state. We know that we have thousands and thousands of jobs in solar, in wind, in energy storage that are being funded by these federal dollars. These are good paying jobs where people can have a career. Some of them even, right out of high school, making $30 an hour, having a great career. That money is going right back into their community. And if this court decides, hey, we don't think that this money is being properly spent in this state, we don't agree, this is not going to be happening, that is a really big concern, not just for the economy, because that would be shutting down all of those jobs, but we know it would be a big issue for climate, right? Because the planet is getting hotter. We just had the hottest year on record in recorded history. We know that it is going to continue to get worse. If we don't do anything to curb emissions, it's going to continue to get hotter. We're going to continue to have more and more extreme weather events that cause flooding, that cause worse natural disasters. We're going to have more tornadoes. We're going to see more hurricanes in the south. And it's going to just get to be a whole lot worse everywhere. So yeah, the impact could be really devastating.
Just to build very quickly on that.
Yeah.
Because Democrats are in the minority in the legislature, one of the most effective policy making things in the state right now is the Wisconsin Public Service Commission, the PSC. The majority of these appointees right now are Evers appointees. You asked about WMC. I am here to tell you that dang near everything the PSC does, WMC will tell you, oh, it's bad for business, it's bad for our big folks. The PSC is a bulwark against that, and the Supreme Court, a Supreme Court that looks at the law and interprets it fairly, is another bulwark against some of these worst outcomes. And so to me, that's how you draw the line between this race and energy, is a Supreme Court that looks at the law, interprets it fairly, and like does that on PSC matters is really, really important. Sorry, Representative.
Oh, no, not at all. That was a very important point. I'm going to simplify it a little bit more. If we have a conservative-leaning court that answers to WMC, the economy is going to tank, because I think when people think about the economy, we aren't exactly able to distill that down into what it is, but the economy is only the economy if there are the people. And if the people are unhealthy, because WMC is defending and protecting big businesses who are polluters, then we're not going to have not a healthy economy, because we don't have healthy people who have opportunities to pursue their right to liberty and happiness and their right to work where they want to and provide for their families. And so the consequences for climate are directly connected to the health of the people. And if we don't have healthy people, we don't have an economy.
So 2030 is right around the corner. And scientists everywhere have said that we cannot have runaway climate change. We got till 2030, and that's the mark. It's not some date that some politician somewhere set up. It's scientists. And my good colleague Chris Larson said that 10 years ago was the best time to do something about this. The second best time is now. And as Dr. King talked about being in the fierce urgency of now, when I was on the county board, we created the City-County Task Force on Climate and Economic Equity. And many of those jobs we lost in the city of Milwaukee due to deindustrialization, where the A.O. Smiths and the Tower Automotives and the Adelphis left, though that also created this gap and this hole in our city's economy as well. You had middle-class folks who were able to go from one job in the morning, quit and go to another job in the afternoon, who are not able to do that. We could replace whole industries by doing green-collar economies in places like in the city of Milwaukee, places like in Kaukauna, places like in Chippewa Falls. And this is that great opportunity to build that rural and urban bridge that we always talk about. Some people want to have a rural-urban divide. We're building a bridge and making sure that we can do the work and actually get things done. And the Climate Accountability Act, I was in a Republican's office earlier today where they were talking about nuclear energy and saying, oh, but it helps us get to our carbon reduction percentage goals. I say, oh, converging interests, let's have a conversation. And we're able to do that now. And one of the biggest things is that we always have our labor folks and our environmental folks. I think it's really important to sit down, have a conversation, tell everybody you love them, go through the different parts of the conversation that are tough. Then at the end of the conversation, remind everybody that you love them again, and then move forward and see what we can do to get to our 2030 goals, which will get us to our 2050 goal of net zero.
All right, one more question then before Kreitlow gives me the hook here. One of the ways I see this election connecting to our economy is on the issue of fair maps. Longtime recombobulation area readers are probably not all that surprised to hear me bring this up. But this to me is at the very foundation of how we make decisions on any issue in Wisconsin, including issues relating to the economy. The current court, one of the biggest decisions of the new liberal majority was to strike down the old egregiously gerrymandered maps, ruling them unconstitutional. So how do you see this election impacting fair maps and the redistricting process here in Wisconsin? We'll start with our state representatives here.
If we have a conservative-leaning court, one of their priority items will be to go back to rigged maps so that the legislature can be ruled by an artificial majority that was gained by having rigged maps. If we want to see economic prosperity for our state by bringing in hundreds of $millions by decriminalizing cannabis, by ensuring working families have access to universal paid leave, childcare, caregiving, to make sure that we are able to fully fund our public schools, all of these policies that we know would transform and improve lives for working people cannot happen under rigged maps. And so that is one of the biggest things at stake. I would say one of maybe the biggest thing at stake right now is our ability to continue to prosper in this state under a democracy has everything to do with those rigged maps.
There are Republicans who have been heard saying, let's wait till April 1st and see what happens on that day. And they're not going to have new rigged maps. They're going to go back to the old rigged maps. We want our old maps back, the kind where a person like a Tony Evers could win the state by 2 points, but they still get 2/3 of the seats in the assembly. Those are the kind of maps that they want. They want perpetuitous pressure and control over things. And there are so many things at stake. You don't get these brilliant minds that we have in our caucus now with those old rigged maps. You get the same old, do what I tell you to do. I'm not going to hold a hearing. I'm not even going to meet with you about this bill. I'm not going to have a conversation with you. I don't care what people in your community think about it. They don't matter. And then they tell you, well, oh, you're losing because people don't like your politics, or your politics aren't good. You don't have the right issues. Not these crazy gerrymandered maps that we have.
I agree with everything, and we know that without the ability, also, Wisconsin is different from some other states. We don't have the ability to go to a statewide referendum like some other states do on policies, right? So even though we have things like expanding Medicaid, which would allow us to save billions of dollars and cover tens of thousands more people, we can't do that in Wisconsin because we can't go to referendum. We can't pass things like closing the boyfriend loophole and requiring background checks on firearms and taking them away from domestic abusers, because even though 80% of Wisconsinites, even people who own guns, support things like that, because we don't have a statewide referendum capability and Republicans in the legislature won't allow it. So we need fair maps to make sure that we can elect a legislature that is going to represent the will of the people. So it's incredibly important that we get the right person who will be fair and impartial on the Supreme Court. So we've got the ability to preserve our fair maps and have a legislature that's going to represent the will of the people.
In 20 seconds or less, because I know we got to go. When we have a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people, it is possible to have an economy that is for the people. If you have a government that is of the billionaires, by the billionaires, it will only ever be for billionaires like Elon Musk. That's the choice on April 1st.
Let's give a big hand for our panel, Joe Zepecki and Melissa Baldauff, State Representative Supreme Moore Omokunde, and State Representative Francesca Hong. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And thanks to our panel. As they step down and we get set for our third panel, let me tell you just a moment, if folks hadn't heard the news, maybe they're catching us in their car after a day of work or anything like that, Donald Trump's head of the Environmental Protection Agency today announced massive rollbacks of environmental regulations, and his quote was, "We are driving a dagger through the heart of the climate change religion and ushering in America's golden age." I think he misspelled gilded age on there. I mean, this is This is Bond villain level stuff, which is what we called the 6 a.m. hour of Up North News Radio this morning, where Melissa Baldauff and I talked about the promises that are being kept by the Trump administration to roll back and to say that they have a moral obligation to bring fossil fuels back to the world. Every election counts, and this Supreme Court one is no exception. The folks listening on Civic Media across the Civic Media Radio Network are going to pause for a quick break. We here are going to hear as well from one of our sponsoring groups, Indivisible, and then we'll get started with panel number 3. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Before we get started with our third and final panel discussion, this one on the issue of reproductive health rights and the importance of this state's Supreme Court election, we want to hear from one of our sponsor and participating partner organizations, along with Up North News and Civic Media, for putting on today's event, and that would be Indivisible.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Glad to be here. My name is Jonathan Garber. I'm just a citizen here in Madison, Wisconsin. I am a co-founder and a member of the Madison East Indivisible chapter, and I just want to tell you about how this started for me. I was just really marginally involved with political work, except I did do a lot of campaigning for local progressive candidates in Madison. But I was sitting in my chair during the election results, and as the evening went on, actually it didn't take very long, I was sinking lower and lower in my chair, feeling that probably the same feeling you felt of a foreboding of what was about to come, as if people couldn't look to see what was going to be happening a few months later. We didn't know exactly, but we had a general idea. But I decided that instead of feeling the despair that I was feeling, I was going to get involved. So unlike the people here who have jobs as journalists and they are involved in policy organizations such as education and the environment. We have legislators here. I'm just a citizen, and I am part of Indivisible because we are an organization of citizens. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what Indivisible is and then encourage you to join an Indivisible chapter near you. Indivisible is a national grassroots network of thousands of groups and millions of activists across every state taking regular, iterative, and increasingly complex actions to resist the GOP agenda, elect local champions, and fight for progressive politics. Indivisible groups make calls, they show up at elected officials' offices, they speak with their neighbors, they organize rallies and organizations. In fact, we actually are hosting an empty chair event. We've invited Ron Johnson to show up at one of our events coming up soon. It's just probably going to be an empty chair, but we're going to videotape it. People are going to talk about what they want to tell Ron Johnson, and then we're going to send him a videotape. All right. So that's what we do. Though through that work, we built hundreds of mini movements in support of national and local priorities informed by their practices. And now after training and repetition, because we were involved in Trump 1.0, we build lasting power on home turf, a massive collective political muscle ready to be exercised each and every day in every corner of the country. So we are a national organization, but each of our groups, like Madison East, is a local grassroots organization. We decide what we're going to focus on. Since the start of 2025, Indivisible Wisconsin has seen a huge uptick in resistance organizing. The network has had, actually we have about 30 local indivisible groups since the election just here in Wisconsin, including Green Bay, Eau Claire, Ashland, Superior, Appleton, River Falls, Sheboygan, Manitowoc, and several in southwest Wisconsin. We've been hugely involved in a recent spate of congressional town halls, forcing Republican representatives to their own cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security. Local groups like Door County Invisible, Grassroots Germantown work closely with Wisconsin Fair Maps Coalition to ensure every Wisconsin voter has the chance to elect representation that is accountable to them and not party donors. Grassroots Menominee Falls area has done a lot of great work fighting book bans in the falls, including works with Jackie Picot, I hope I pronounced that right, and generating a ton of media exposure. Our groups are involved in building a better Wisconsin, and if you'd like to get involved, come to the Madison East table after the panels, and you can just scan our QR code to get involved. But if you're not from Madison, or we do have 3 other organizations in Madison alone, but we have 30 around the state, and if you want to get involved, go to indivisible.org, find a group, and you put in your zip code, and you can find a group near you. Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, let's bring in our third panel where we're going to talk about reproductive health rights here. And as they take their seats, tell folks who were just tuning in late that you are listening to our Up North News first ever live presentation, live event talking about the stakes of the state Supreme Court race. We spoke earlier about the stakes for education in Wisconsin and in the economy. And now we're going to be talking about reproductive health care rights with a wonderful panel of folks here. Joining us now, we have Michelle Velasquez from Planned Parenthood Advocates of Wisconsin. We're going to be talking to Heather Martell from Chippewa Falls. We'll talk to Dr. Eliza Bennett, an obstetrician gynecologist, and State Senator Kelda Roys. Welcome them all to our panel. Heather, can I start with you? We've spoken before, and it is a story that is heartbreaking, but also truly brings the issue home of the importance of allowing women and families and their physicians the freedom to make choices so that they can have the families that they want when they want. That was certainly your goal when your life took turns that you didn't expect. How do you tell folks about your story and why you're so active about it?
Well, in 2021, after years of trying to conceive with no luck, including IUI and Clomid, you name it, we conceived naturally, and at our anatomical ultrasound, which usually takes place at 20 weeks. We had it done at 19 weeks. We found out that our son was incompatible with life. He was missing vital organs. The organs that he did have were underdeveloped, undeveloped. There was failure to thrive, fetal seizures. He wasn't going to survive outside of my body. We had a nursery all set up. We were ready for a baby. But we learned that pregnancy does not always mean baby. We went from planning the colors of our nursery to planning which urn we would be taking our son home in. We had to figure out, because at that point in 2021, Minnesota's abortion laws were 23 weeks. After 23 weeks, you couldn't have an abortion. In Wisconsin, it was 20 weeks. So in the matter of 3 weeks, we had to plan all of the steps for an abortion, plus wrap our heads around the fact that we were losing our child. When the Dobbs decision came down. I attended a rally I'm from Chippewa Falls. The town next to us is Eau Claire. That's where our federal courthouse is. When Dobbs fell, we had a rally at that courthouse, and I grabbed the mic and started telling our story. And I haven't stopped since. Thank you.
And that, Dr. Bennett, gets us into the notion of why you hear people talk about abortion care and not just abortion. And you talk about health care and reproductive rights. The Dobbs decision, I think, has helped a lot of people understand the much wider range than people thinking, oh, abortion is just this matter of convenience. Can you talk a little bit more about how it's full health care, and then we'll get into the legal framework that surrounds it.
Right, so abortion affects all sorts of people. Many people, like yourself, that thought that they were going to be able to have a baby. It affects pregnancies that people planned and intended and very much desired. And it affects the health of women and of pregnant patients everywhere. And the access to abortion and requiring abortion care is unpredictable. People don't know when they're going to need it. They don't know what's going to happen in their pregnancies. Physicians don't know. We can't predict it. And, you know, we lived through a year and a half of the 1849 law restricting our ability to care for patients, and it was tragic because I had to look to people and say, I can't take care of you. I need to send you to Illinois. I need to send you to Minnesota. I've been taking care of them for their whole pregnancy, and then they get a tragic diagnosis, and I have to shunt them off to a different state. Not to mention patients that you could take care of who had potentially lethal complications of pregnancy, you still were living in fear that you were going to get charged with some kind of felony. That your license was at risk, that your practice was at risk, that your ability to care for patients in the future would be at risk.
So when it comes to this Wisconsin Supreme Court election, what would you like to see in terms of a justice and a court and the degree to which they are in your exam room?
We need a justice that understands that reproductive health care should be decided by a patient and their physician. We need... And we need a justice that has a record that shows that they support those decisions and that kind of legislation, and not a justice that has time and time again defended laws that encroach upon the rights of patients to make their own decisions.
Michelle Velasquez, talk to us then about the legal framework. There are going to be laws about healthcare, about all kinds of other issues. What is the right way for a Supreme Court, and then we'll talk about a legislature, to have a legal framework that is essentially a shield for women and their doctors rather than a cage? What do we need to see from a Supreme Court?
Thanks, that's a good question. So when Dobbs was decided, essentially what it did is, you know, throw it back to the states is sort of what we hear a lot. So when we lost a federal constitutional protection, that now requires our state Supreme Court to interpret our own state's constitution. And what do these words mean? What do the words, all people are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent rights, among those of which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? So we need a Supreme Court justice who recognizes that people have bodily autonomy, that they have agency, and that they have a right to decide their own lives and their own futures because they know what is best for their families.
Senator Calderoys, this is something that you have been active and vocal about for a long time now, and so obviously this Wisconsin Supreme Court race means a lot to you. So let's just come back to the root question. How important is this race deciding control of the court for women and families in Wisconsin?
this is the most important election that we face in terms of reproductive freedom and women's equality. And the reason is we have in Wisconsin an 1849 ban on the books. It is one of the most strict and severe bans in the country. In fact, when you look at Georgia's abortion ban, Texas's abortion ban, they're actually not as strict as the one Wisconsin has. And Brad Schimmel has said time and time again that he's fine with the 1849 law. He would eagerly put that back into place like that if he were put on the Supreme Court. He would find a way to put that in place. On the other hand, you have Susan Crawford, someone who has spent her career as a prosecutor standing up for women, helping people who are victimized. She works as an attorney representing Planned Parenthood. She is someone who is a woman, cares deeply about women's lives and health, and I trust that she would do her job as a justice to be fair about it, and that she would understand and see that the 1849 ban is not acceptable and we cannot go back to this 19th century law.
I want to come back to a theme that has been mentioned in the other panels, but I think is important and perhaps overlooked, and that is the whole notion that a newly comprised conservative-controlled court would strike down the fair maps and put a legislature back into place. Well, it's already a Republican majority, but a supermajority, and what it would mean for women's health care rights, because we're talking more than abortion here. We're talking things like IVF, and I would imagine you've seen bills or proposals for other ways that a legislature, thanks to a new Supreme Court, would show up in that exam room, if not the bedroom.
Absolutely. I mean, here's one thing we can say with certainty about Republicans and right-wing politicians. They will do anything to get and keep power. That is what they care about, and that is what they are best at. Everything else, improving your life, they're not good at that. But they are absolutely good at rigging the system to benefit themselves and to implement their far right-wing unpopular schemes. In Wisconsin, if the Supreme Court flips back to conservative, we will be re-gerrymandered in a matter of months. We will see the 1849 ban reinstated. We will see further retrenchment on all kinds of issues, right? Not just abortion, but access to birth control. We had a bill in the last session to say, okay, abortion is always under legal threat, but let's make sure that we have established a right to contraception in our statute so that no matter who you are, you can do it. Every single Senate Republican voted against it, every one. So that's the extremists that we are dealing with, and those are the people that are going to be empowered to make decisions and have permanent control of the legislature unless we elect Susan Crawford to the Supreme Court.
Michelle, during a time when the 1849 statute was under debate and Planned Parenthood ceased abortion care services, there are so many other services that Planned Parenthood provides. What was the impact on basic health care that was provided in Wisconsin during that time?
Sure. Well, abortion is basic health care. That is health care that people need for all sorts of reasons, and all of those reasons are valid. And, so the impact was that people who relied on being able to go to places like Planned Parenthood for that care had to go out of state. It meant that OBGYNs and other healthcare professionals like Dr. Bennett were terrified about whether or not they had crossed the line into something that a prosecutor could say, or at least argue, it was criminal under that ban. It also meant that people had confusion around what they could access and what they couldn't. So, for example, emergency contraception is not an abortifacient, but we had a lot of people asking questions about whether they could still access emergency contraception. So this really just all goes back to we need justices who interpret our state constitution as giving all of us, because we all deserve this, the agency and autonomy to make reproductive healthcare choices for ourselves, and that includes birth control, and that includes abortion, and it goes beyond that. Things like IVF, transgender care, LGBTQ rights, all of these things really relate back to that personal bodily autonomy and agency.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Bennett, there's a new gubernatorial election in 2026. There's a way that these maps could be construed to give a supermajority once again to conservatives. So there could very well be a situation down the road here where without a governor to veto it, we'd be looking, if not at some kind of a total abortion ban, we get into the numbers game, which we see a checkerboard all over this country. Here's an abortion ban at 14 weeks. Here's one at 13 weeks. Here's one at 8 weeks. Here's one at 16 weeks. As somebody who is a doctor, right? Medical professional, scientist, I believe. Can you answer for us the healthcare basis of why there's all these different numbers? Is there one number that's right? Are any of these rooted in science whatsoever?
No.
Thank you.
No.
Okay, the witness is excused. No. But how does that feel as a doctor, knowing that Supreme Courts, not just the U.S., but all these states, are all going to be asked to weigh, well, this ban for this many weeks and this one for that many weeks, as somebody who actually looks at the science of pregnancy?
It's infuriating and frustrating and just makes our job and the health and lives of patients very difficult. Not to mention, when we look at these states that have passed these bans, it is having a negative impact on people choosing to be OBGYNs, on people choosing to do residencies in these states. I train residents here. If we go back to a situation where we're no longer able to teach the full depth and breadth of obstetrics and gynecology, then we will lose out on residents. And those residents are who becomes doctors in our state. So the entire state of Wisconsin loses out on high quality physicians because we didn't recruit those people because we passed laws that made them choose to never come here.
And I'm going to affirm that as somebody whose wife is an OBGYN and practices in a rural area, that the rural healthcare crisis is real right now, much less exacerbated by the factors that you've laid out. Heather, I started with you and come back to you near the end because I know you wanted to make this a bit more interactive with the folks here and ask a few questions and help kind of bring this issue home to others.
Yeah, so is it okay if I stand up?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. I like to walk. I was in a car for 3 hours, so. My name's Heather Martell. You heard my story. You've heard from the other panelists. There's a number of you here. I ask that if you feel safe and comfortable to do so, that you raise your hand. Please raise your hand if you've ever been pregnant.
I'm going to use a radio prerogative to say that since it's radio, could we also applaud? Maybe raise your hand quickly. And thank you.
Or applaud, okay. And again, if you're comfortable and safe to do so. Applaud if you've ever had a miscarriage. A stillbirth. Thank you for your bravery. Have been induced early. Had an ectopic pregnancy. Had complications from twins or multiples, such as twin-to-twin transfusion syndrome. Had a placental or cervical problem, like cervical insufficiency, placenta previa, or placental abruption. A pregnancy-related condition like preeclampsia or gestational diabetes. Diagnosis of a fetal anomaly or incompatible with life. It's a sad club to be in. Postpartum infection, also known as childbed fever, septic uterus, septic shock. Had an abortion for any reason. Thank you for your bravery. I don't expect anyone to clap or make themselves known for this one, but survived rape or incest. Everyone that clapped, that raised their hand, everyone that clapped tonight would have run the risk of not being able to access treatment with Brad Schimmel in charge. We would have run the risk of dying if a man like Brad Schimmel is in charge. You may not like the candidates. You don't have to like the candidates. You don't have to love the candidates. But you have to realize that somebody you love will die, could die, if a man like Brad Schimmel is in charge. He is a danger to women. All of these things that I asked, all conditions that doctors like her help us with. When her hands are tied, we run the risk of dying. That's not fair to us. We deserve better. We deserve somebody much better than Brad Schimmel, who has continually showed us who he is. He is a man who does not trust women, who does not trust families, and will put his beliefs before our health and safety. Thank you.
I've got just under 2 minutes left, and while that it would be nice to and so proper to end on a note like that, but to the rest of our panel, if any of you have any reaction to what she said or any parting words, I'd love to hear them. Doctor, let's start with you.
I would just like to echo your words. I mean, it is so important that patients and physicians are allowed to make healthcare decisions and that it's not under the purview of the legislature or your elected official. And supporting Susan Crawford for Supreme Court is going to get us that type of autonomy that we so desperately need to preserve.
Michelle Velasquez.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, the Supreme Court justice who wins this election will be deciding cases that have real impact and real life implications for everybody in this room, for all of the people in our family, our friends, our community, everybody that we love and care about will be impacted, whether it's reproductive health, whether it's education, whether it's economic justice. All of these things impact our lives. And so I hope you will consider a candidate who will interpret our state constitution and our laws that actually progress bodily autonomy, that progress safety and well-being.
Senator Royce.
You know, on April 1st, the Supreme Court election is obviously critically important because it is really about our freedom to have a democracy and our freedom to live our lives and make our own choices. But you know, the freedom of our kids to learn is also on the ballot. And that's why I want to make sure that people are learning about our state superintendent, Jill Underly, who has been a champion for public education and public schools, and the freedoms that our kids deserve. Our kids deserve the right to a constitutional education, and Brittany Kinzer would deny them that because she supports privatization of our public education system. She is a lobbyist for the voucher interests, and we can't allow that to happen. There's also a constitutional amendment on the ballot. Now, Michelle and I are lawyers. I think we should be pretty careful about amending the state constitution. This was put on specifically to make it harder for people to vote and harder for people to challenge if their rights are violated. Wisconsin has one of the strictest voter ID laws in the country already on the books, but they want to enshrine it in the Constitution so that if your rights are violated and you're denied your right to vote, you can't even go to court and challenge it. So make sure you vote no on that constitutional amendment.
Well, I was going to wrap things up telling you that there are other reasons to vote on April 1st, but my new radio co-host, Kelda Royce over here, is taking some of my job. So it made my life a lot easier. I'm just going to be tossing things back to the studio over at Civic Media because Todd Alba has headed across the street along with Mr. Shafer from the recombobulation area. So my thanks to them, my thanks to our sponsors and partners, my thanks to our parent organization, Courier Newsroom, parent of Up North News. You can find what we do at upnorthnewswi.com. Look for us on social media. My great thanks to our Courier Newsroom team that helped us put this together, to our panelists, and to all of you who attended or are listening or watching by live stream today. Remember to vote on April 1st, and we'll continue to follow it on Up North News and through the Civic Media Radio Network. Thank you again, and good night.